John had always lived a quiet life. He was an ordinary guy in his late 20s, working a typical 9-to-5 job at a tech company. He enjoyed his work, but it wasn't anything exciting. What he really loved were gadgets and the mysteries of the universe. From the moment he was old enough to understand the stars, he dreamt of life beyond Earth. He often found himself wondering what alien creatures might look like, imagining them as strange yet fascinating beings from distant galaxies. One night, as he scrolled through his favorite online forum, he stumbled upon an ad that caught his attention. It read, "Furry friends from other worlds. Adopt your own exotic, out-of-this-world companion. Ships now accepting orders." John's heart raced with excitement. He couldn't believe it. He clicked the link and found an entire website dedicated to intergalactic pets. They offered creatures from various planets, all different shapes and sizes. Some were small and fluffy, while others had strange glowing eyes and long furry tails. Most of them seemed harmless and cute. There was one particular pet that stood out to him, a creature from a planet called Alara. The description said it was a small, furry being with large ears and soft fur. It seemed like the perfect companion for John. Without a second thought, John clicked the Adopt Now button, and soon after, he had paid for the creature. His mind raced with excitement. He couldn't wait to have his own alien pet. A few days later, John received an email confirming his order. The pet would be delivered within a week. John couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Imagine the little creature running around his apartment, bringing a touch of the unknown to his otherwise normal life. The delivery day finally arrived. John had taken the day off work, waiting anxiously for the package to arrive. As the afternoon sun shone through his living room window, he heard a knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. This was it. He opened the door eagerly and was greeted by a delivery man holding a large box. "Here you go," the delivery man said, handing over the box. "Big delivery today, huh?" John smiled nervously. "Yeah, you could say that." The man handed him a clipboard to sign for the package. As John signed, the delivery man turned and walked away, leaving him alone. With the box, it was surprisingly heavy. He dragged it inside, placed it gently on the floor, and eagerly started to open it. The box was big, but the label on the side read "Fragile," so John handled it carefully. The flaps of the box opened with a soft sound, and John's eyes widened when he saw what was inside. Instead of a small furry creature as he had expected, there was a young woman lying in the box. She had soft, glowing skin and hair that shimmered in the light. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of violet, and she looked confused, as if she had no idea where she was. John froze for a moment, not sure if he was dreaming. The woman was dressed in strange clothes made of shimmering fabric. Her features were delicate, almost too perfect to be human, but there was no mistaking it. She was a person. A very beautiful, very confused person. John didn't know what to do. He blinked several times to make sure he wasn't seeing things. She was real. She shifted slightly in the box and looked up at him with wide, startled eyes. "Are you okay?" John asked, his voice shaky. The woman sat up slowly, glancing around the room. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out who he was and why she was there. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she made a few sounds that John couldn't understand. John's mind raced. I don't know what's happening here. Are you lost?" The woman blinked at him, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to understand him. She said something again, but it was just a series of strange sounds. John's heart pounded in his chest. "I don't know what you're saying," he said, stepping back a little. "Are you a person?" The woman tilted her head, clearly confused. She stood up from the box, swaying slightly as if she was unsteady on her feet. She seemed to be trying to say something, but the words didn't make any sense to John. John took a deep breath. He quickly grabbed his phone and pulled up a translation app. He hoped it would help. "Let me try something," he said, tapping away at the screen. The woman watched him closely as he held up the phone, showing her the app. He typed in, "Where are you from?" The woman looked at the screen and then back at him, her face a mix of confusion and curiosity. She took a step closer, staring at the phone. Slowly she typed, "Alara." John's eyes widened. "Wait, Alara, is that your planet?" she nodded, her eyes locking with his. There was something strange and almost otherworldly about her. She didn't seem frightened or aggressive, just confused, like she was trying to understand what had happened to her. John couldn't believe it. He had ordered a pet, and now an alien woman from another world was standing in his living room. He felt a mix of excitement and concern. What was going on? Why was she here? I don't know what to do, he muttered to himself. The woman, still staring at him, suddenly reached out and touched his arm. Her hand was cool, but there was a soft, comforting sensation in her touch. It was almost as if she was trying to reassure him, to say that everything would be okay. John slowly sat down on the couch, feeling overwhelmed. He had always imagined meeting aliens, but he never expected this. Not in a million years. He didn't know whether to be terrified or fascinated. Okay, John said, taking a deep breath. Okay, we'll figure this out. First, we need to figure out who you are and what's going on. The alien woman looked at him, the violet eyes filled with a strange mix of wonder and uncertainty. John had no idea what kind of trouble he had just gotten himself into. But he knew one thing. For sure this was going to be one wild ride. John sat on the couch, his mind spinning. The alien woman Lyra, as she had typed into his phone, stood across from him, silently watching him with her violet eyes. She was beautiful, but there was something more about her that made him feel both amazed and a little scared. He had expected a cute alien pet, not a person. Certainly not someone who was completely out of place in his world. He glanced at his phone again, trying to figure out how to communicate with her. The translation app was working, but it only translated words, not emotions. He needed a better way to understand her. What if she was in trouble? Why was she sent here, and why did she look so confused? Lyra took a step forward and pointed at the couch, then gestured to the door. She seemed to want to communicate, but her body language was more about showing than telling. John was getting the sense that she wasn't fully aware of how Earth worked. Do you want to sit? John asked slowly, unsure of how to proceed. Lyra nodded, her movements graceful. She took a seat beside him, sitting with perfect posture. Her hands rested on her lap, and she looked out of the window as if she was taking in everything she saw. Though John was sure she didn't fully understand what she was seeing, John continued to stare at her, still in shock. I don't know what to make of this, he muttered to himself. Lyra tilted her head, looking at him as if she understood. She gave him a small smile, though it was clear that her confusion was still there. John had always dreamed of meeting aliens, but never like this. He had no idea where to start. Taking a deep breath, John looked around his apartment, trying to figure out what to do. It was a small place, nothing special. He had a few gadgets scattered around, books on space and science fiction, and the usual stuff that most people would keep in their homes. But none of that seemed to matter right now. The reality of the situation hit him. He wasn't just looking at an alien pet. He was looking at someone who might need help, someone who might be lost, stranded, or even in danger. He reached over to the table and grabbed a notebook and a pen. Let's try this, he said. I'll write down some questions, and we'll see if you can answer. He quickly wrote, Where are you from? And showed it to her. Lyra looked at the page, then at John. She pointed to herself and said something soft in a language that John couldn't understand. Her voice was melodic, almost musical, but the words didn't translate. I don't get it, John said, frustrated. He wiped his face with his hands, feeling overwhelmed. Okay, what am I supposed to do here? Lyra reached over, taking the pen from his hand. She carefully wrote something on the page, using the same smooth handwriting he had seen on her phone earlier. She wrote, I'm from Alara. I was sent to Earth. John stared at the words, sent to Earth. Why would someone send her here? Why? Did she look so confused, like she didn't know how she got here? You were sent? John asked, his voice quiet. But why? Who sent you? Lyra paused for a moment. She looked down at the paper, unsure of how to respond. Finally, she wrote, I was escaping. Escaping? His heart pounding. Escaping from who? Lyra bit her lip, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She didn't write anything more. Instead, she shook her head gently, as if she couldn't bring herself to explain. John's mind raced. He didn't want to push her, but he couldn't just ignore this. Whoever had sent her, whether it was the hunters or anyone else, was a real problem. She was here for a reason, and he wasn't sure he could just let her stay without knowing what was going on. He had to protect her. He couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He glanced over at his phone again, trying to find a solution. He could contact the authorities, but something told him that wouldn't help. He couldn't trust anyone with this. Not yet. Lyra didn't seem like someone who could be explained in a report or a call to the police. She was different, and John could feel it. "You don't have to talk about it yet," he said, trying to offer her some comfort. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But I'm going to help you, I promise." Lyra looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. She gave him a small nod, and it was as if a weight lifted off her shoulders. She didn't have to explain everything right away. She didn't have to be afraid. John was there, and he would figure this out. John stood up and moved to the kitchen. "I'll get us some food. You must be hungry." Lyra watched him go, her eyes still filled with curiosity. She was trying to understand the world around her, but everything was so new to her. John wasn't sure how she was coping, but it seemed like she had been through a lot. As John rummaged through his fridge, his mind kept returning to the question, why was she here? What was she escaping from? He couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was going on than a simple misunderstanding. He set down a few sandwiches on the counter and walked back into the living room. "Here," he said, offering Lyra a plate. She looked at it, then at him, unsure of what to do. "It's food," John explained with a smile. "It's called a sandwich. You can eat it." Lyra tentatively took the sandwich, inspecting it before taking a small bite. Her face lit up with an expression of pleasure, and John couldn't help but smile. She seemed to like it. As she ate, John sat down beside her again. "We'll figure this out, Lyra, one step at a time." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. John couldn't stop wondering about her past. Who had sent her here? What did she escape from? Most importantly, how could he keep her safe? John's life had just changed completely. But instead of being afraid, he felt a strange sense of excitement. This was the kind of adventure he had always dreamed of. But now that it was real, he knew that protecting Lyra and finding out the truth behind her story would be far more challenging than he had ever imagined. It had been 2 days since Lyra had arrived at John's apartment, and things had already changed in ways John hadn't imagined. He was no longer living his ordinary life, with his usual routine of work and quiet evenings. Now, he had an alien. In his living room, someone who seemed to be in need of help and, for some strange reason, trusted him. Lyra had begun to adjust to Earth's way of life, but it was still difficult for her. She didn't understand much of the technology or even the way people lived. She would often gaze out the window, looking up at the sky as though searching for someone. John wondered if she was homesick, if she missed her home planet. Alara, he didn't know how to help her with that. John had spent the last 2 days trying to understand her more. He tried to teach her the basics of Earth culture, how to use a phone, how to make simple decisions in a store, and what food was safe to eat. He even helped her pick out some clothes, though it wasn't easy. Lyra didn't understand the concept of clothing the way humans did, or people, it seemed, didn't wear much. And the fabric they used was completely different from Earth's textiles. Despite the small steps they were taking, there was still a huge communication barrier. Lyra understood a little of the English he spoke, and she had learned a few words, but her vocabulary was limited. John had been using his phone's translation app, but it wasn't perfect. And there were still many moments of silence between them. But there were also moments when Lyra would show a faint smile or a curious expression, and John felt like they were making some progress. She was no longer so afraid, and she seemed to trust him more with each passing day. She had stopped hiding in corners and started sitting at the table with him during meals, trying to eat like he did. One morning, John made pancakes for breakfast. He set the table and then called out to Lyra, who was still in her room. She had been spending a lot of time there, still adjusting to this strange new life. She walked out slowly, eyes wide with curiosity, as she watched John set the food on. "The table? Do you like pancakes?" John asked with a smile. He held up one of the pancakes on the plate, hoping it would be a friendly gesture. Lyra looked at it, clearly unsure. then slowly reached out and took the plate from his hands. She held the pancake in her hands, staring at it for a moment. John waited, unsure of what to expect. Finally, Lyra took a small bite. She chewed slowly, her expression unreadable. Then her face lit up, and she nodded enthusiastically. "Good," she said in broken English. John smiled, relieved that she liked it. "I'm glad you think so." He sat down opposite her, feeling a bit more comfortable with the idea that they were finding common ground. Over the next few minutes, they ate together in silence. John watched as Lyra carefully studied each bite, savoring the taste. It was clear she had never had anything like it before. After breakfast, John decided it was time to take the next step in understanding more about Lyra's life. He had to learn what had happened to her, why she had come to Earth, and why she was so clearly running from something. He sat down next to her on the couch and turned to face her. "Lyra," he began gently, "I know it's hard, but we need to talk about where you came from. So what happened to you before you came here?" Lyra shifted uncomfortably. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she stared down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. John noticed that, despite her calm demeanor, she seemed to tense up whenever he asked about her past. There was something she wasn't ready to talk about, and that was okay. He didn't want to push her too hard, but he had to know what they were dealing with. He decided to take a different approach. "I know you're not from around here," John continued softly. "I'm not going to force you to tell me everything, but if you can, please let me know what's happening. I want to help you." "I really do." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes meeting his, and for a moment, John thought she might speak, but instead, she shook her head. Her expression a mixture of sadness and fear. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, a metal object that looked like a handheld communicator. She handed it to John, who took it cautiously. The device was unlike anything he had seen before. It was sleek, with glowing symbols that seemed to shift and move across its surface. The moment John touched it, the device seemed to react, and a series of symbols appeared on the screen, followed by a voice. The voice wasn't in English. It was the same language Lyra had spoken earlier. John's eyes widened in surprise. Was this some kind of message from her people? The words on the screen seemed familiar, but he couldn't make sense of them. He could tell that Lyra was waiting for him to figure it out, but the symbols didn't translate. "I'm sorry," John said, frustrated. "I don't understand." Lyra reached over and tapped a few buttons on the device. The screen shifted, and a translation appeared. "Help us, Lyra. Return to your home." John stared at the words, his heart sinking. "Return." "Right?" he asked softly. "Who is asking you to return? Who is this?" Lyra's face twisted with emotion as she looked at the message, but she didn't answer. She simply shook her head again, looking away. John felt a pit form in his stomach. It was clear that, whatever was going on, whatever danger Lyra was facing, she wasn't ready to share it with him. He sighed and put the device down gently. "It's okay, Lyra. You don't have to tell me now. I'm just trying to understand. I'll help you no matter what happens." She nodded slowly, her face softening. She didn't say anything more, but the relief in her eyes was clear. Realized that, despite her silence, she was beginning to trust him more. They weren't just strangers anymore. They were becoming allies. John leaned back on the couch, thinking about everything he had learned so far. He didn't know who was after Lyra, or what danger awaited them both, but he was determined to help her. He had never imagined that he would find himself in this situation, but he couldn't walk away now. There was no turning back. As he looked over at Lyra, sitting next to him, John knew that this was only the beginning. The more he learned, the more he realized that the world as he knew it was about to change. And with Lyra by his side, he had no idea what the future would hold. He was ready to face it, whatever it was. It had been a week since Lyra arrived at John's apartment. Each day had brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. John was slowly getting used to the idea of having an alien in his life, and Lyra was beginning to adapt to life on Earth. They had learned how to communicate better thanks to the translation app and the small device that Lyra had shown him. However, John could tell that there was still much she wasn't ready to share. There was a fear in her eyes whenever he brought up her past, a fear he couldn't ignore. That evening, John sat on the couch, his laptop open in front of him. He had been spending hours researching everything he could about Alara, Lyra's home planet, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her arrival on Earth. But the more he dug into it, the more questions he had. There was no record of a planet named Alara in any Earth databases. No star systems, no mention of it in any space exploration missions. It was as though Alara didn't exist at all. It was unsettling. Lyra sat on the floor nearby, her eyes fixed on John's screen. She didn't understand much about Earth's technology, but she seemed fascinated by the images of planets and stars that appeared on his laptop. She still hadn't told him much about her planet, but John felt it was time to press her for answers. Lyra, John began, his voice calm. I've been trying to find out more about Alara, but there's nothing. No information. It's like your planet doesn't exist. Can you tell me why? What's going on? Lyra looked up at him, her face tense. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she stared at the screen, her violet eyes narrowing. John could see the conflict in her expression. She wanted to answer, but something was holding her back. I know you're scared, John continued gently. But if we're going to figure this out, I need your help. We need to understand what's really happening. Who's after you, and why? Lyra shifted uncomfortably, but then, slowly, she reached for the small device she had shown him earlier. She pressed a few buttons, and a message appeared on the screen. It was a warning, one that made John's heart race. Do not trust them. Lyra, do not go back to Alara. They will use you. John's hands shook as he read the words. What does this mean? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra didn't look at him. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the window, her gaze focused on the city lights below. John felt a growing sense of unease. He wasn't sure who had sent that message, but the words were clear. Someone or something on her home planet wanted to use her for their own purposes. For the next few hours, John tried to ask her more questions, but Lyra remained quiet. She seemed to be lost in her own thoughts, her mind far away. John understood that she was struggling with her past, but he couldn't just sit back and wait for answers. He had to know more. That night, as they sat at the table, eating dinner, John made a decision. I think we need to go to Alara, he said, looking at Lyra. If we can find out what happened to you, maybe we can figure out how to keep you safe. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. She shook her head quickly as if the very idea terrified her. No, she said, her voice trembling. You can't. It's too dangerous. They will find you. They will hurt you. John placed his hands gently on the table, trying to calm her. Lyra, I'm not going to let anyone hurt you, but I need to understand what's happening. If you don't want to go back to Alara, I can help you. I just need to know why, please. For a moment, it seemed like Lyra wasn't going to say anything. She looked at John with a mixture of sadness and fear in her eyes. Then slowly, she began to speak. They are not who they seem to be, Lyra began, her voice soft and cautious. Alara is not the place you think it is, like it used to. Be peaceful, my people. They were kind. They wanted to help others. But something changed. There are those in power who have become cruel. They want to control everything, everyone. They use technology to manipulate people. It took me because they thought I could help them. John listened closely, his heart heavy with what he was hearing. What do they want from you? He asked. Lyra swallowed hard. I don't know exactly, but they want to use me to control others. I escaped because I couldn't let that happen. I didn't want to be part of their plan, but now they are looking for me. John stood up, his mind racing with thoughts. The more he heard, the more he realized how serious this was. Lyra wasn't just a victim of some random attack. She was part of something much bigger, a power struggle on a planet he knew nothing about. If we don't do something, they'll come for you, John said. And if we don't stop them, they could hurt everyone.
Yeah.
I won't let that happen. Lyra looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything.
Ow.
She knew John was right. She couldn't run forever, okay? John said, his voice firm. We'll find a way to stop them. First, we need to figure out how to get to Alara. I don't care what it takes. We're going to stop this together. For the first time. Lyra smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She trusted John, and that meant more than anything. John began researching ways to travel to Alara, though he had no idea how they could possibly reach another planet. But he wasn't going to give up. He had already come this far. He couldn't leave Lyra to face the dangers on her own. That night, as he sat at his computer, typing away, John realized that his life had completely changed. He had gone from an ordinary guy to someone involved. In a galactic struggle for power, despite the fear and uncertainty, he felt a sense of purpose. He was going to help Lyra no matter what. And whatever happened next, John knew that he was ready. He had no idea what awaited them on Alara. But he wouldn't face it alone. Together they would find a way to stop those who wanted to hurt her, and the galaxy would never be the same. The following days felt like a blur to John. The weight of what he had learned about Lyra's past, and the looming danger that followed her had made everything feel uncertain. But John was determined to help her. They had talked about going to Alara, but after Lyra's warning, it was clear that it would be dangerous for both of them. Yet sitting still wasn't an option. They had to act before the forces after Lyra found them. John knew they needed a plan. They couldn't just hide forever. He spent his nights researching everything he could find on the device Lyra had shown. Him, hoping it might help them find a way to stop whoever was chasing her. But there was nothing concrete. Every time he searched, more questions popped up. Lyra had begun teaching him small pieces of her language. It was difficult, but the words were beautiful, filled with sounds John had never heard before. She seemed to feel more comfortable around him, but still. There were moments when she would freeze, her eyes far away, as though remembering something painful. John wasn't sure what she was hiding, but he could tell it was something important. One evening, John stood in his kitchen, preparing dinner. The familiar sound of the stove and the smell of food comforted him. Lyra had been quiet all afternoon, as though she was deep in thought. He had grown used to the silence between them, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. Suddenly, the sound of a loud bang came from the front door. It startled both of them, and John's heart skipped a beat. He had grown paranoid over the past. Weak, always checking the locks, always looking out the window, but nothing could have prepared him for this. "John," Lyra whispered urgently from behind him. "They're here." John's blood ran cold. His first instinct was to protect her, to hide her away, but that wasn't enough. They had to face what was coming. He turned quickly and grabbed the nearest thing, a frying pan. It wasn't the weapon he wished for, but it would have to do. The door rattled as someone outside began pounding on it. John's mind raced. Who were they? The hunters Lyra had mentioned. Was it them? "Stay behind me," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll get through this." Lyra nodded, her face tense. Her usual calm demeanor was gone. This time, John saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just scared for herself, she was scared for him too. John had promised to protect her, but he wasn't sure if he could. There was another loud bang, and the door cracked open slightly. John took a deep breath and grabbed the frying pan, moving quietly to the door. He stood with his back pressed against the wall, trying to listen. Couldn't hear anything now, only his own breathing. With a sudden, violent force, the door slammed open, and two figures stormed into the room. John barely had time to react before one of them grabbed him by the arm, pulling him away from Lyra. "Who are you?" the man shouted, his voice deep and cold. He was tall and muscular, with an alien appearance that seemed familiar yet foreign to John. His skin was a pale shade of blue, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Behind him stood another figure, a woman with similar features. John struggled to break free, but the man's grip was too strong. He looked toward Lyra, who stood frozen by the kitchen, her face filled with shock. It was clear she recognized the people who had come for her. Her enemies. "You don't belong here," the man hissed, his voice like gravel. "You're coming with us." "No," Lyra cried out, stepping forward. You can't take me. I won't go back. The woman moved quickly, trying to grab Lyra. But John acted on instinct. With a sudden burst of strength, he swung the frying pan at the woman. It hit her in the arm, making her stumble back in surprise. "Stay away from her," John shouted, his voice filled with panic and determination. The man who had grabbed him growled and shoved him to the side, knocking John against the wall. He struggled to stand, pain shooting through his body, but he didn't care. Lyra was in danger. He had to protect her. Enough. The man shouted, raising his hand, and suddenly John felt a sharp pain in his head. It was as though something was pulling at his mind, squeezing it. He gasped for air, his vision starting to blur. "John," Lyra shouted, her voice filled with desperation. She stepped forward, her hands glowing with a soft blue light. She raised them toward the man, and for the first time, John saw something extraordinary. A wave of energy shot from her hands, striking the man square in the chest. He staggered back, surprised by the force of the blow, but he didn't fall. Instead, he grinned, showing sharp, jagged teeth. "You think you can stop us with that?" He sneered, wiping his chest where the blast had struck. "You're weak, Lyra. You always have been." But Lyra didn't back down. She stepped forward again, her hands glowing brighter this time. She was determined to protect John, to stop these enemies from taking her back to Alara. John saw the change in her. This wasn't just the frightened alien girl who had landed in his apartment. This was someone with power, someone who could fight back. With a swift movement, she unleashed another burst of energy. This time it hit the man directly in the chest, sending him flying across the room. He crashed into the wall with a thud, but he wasn't done yet. He struggled to get up, anger flashing in his eyes. "Stay back," John said, struggling to his feet. He looked at Lyra, knowing this wasn't over yet. She was strong, but so were they. He could see it in their eyes, the relentless determination to take her back. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening for just a moment. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll go with them. It's safer this way," John said firmly. "I won't let them take you. I promised I would protect you, and I will." Just then, the door burst open once more, and 3 more figures rushed in. Lyra's eyes widened in fear as she recognized them immediately. They were the leaders of the group who had been chasing her, the ones who would stop at nothing to capture her. The fight wasn't over, and John knew that this was just the beginning. There was no running away now. They had to fight for their lives, and John would do whatever it took to keep Lyra safe. The apartment was chaos. John stood against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He had just witnessed Lyra unleash a burst of energy that knocked one of the alien hunters across the room. The man had recovered quickly, and now there were 4. Of them 3 men and 1 woman, all determined to take Lyra back to Alara. The air between them was thick with tension, and every second felt like it could be their last. John's head was still spinning from the blow the man had dealt him earlier, but he could barely feel the pain. His thoughts were on Lyra, who was standing in front of him, her hands glowing with power. She had never been so calm during an attack, and it was clear that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to fight for her freedom. "Can't take her," John said, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. "She's not going back." The woman stepped forward, a cold smile on her face. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice filled with authority. "She's too important to be left here. Lara needs her. We need her." John's fist clenched. "I don't care what Alara needs. I care about what she wants, and she doesn't want to go back. She's not your weapon." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she raised her hand, a strange, invisible force pushing against John. It felt like an unseen wall was pressing against him, and he stumbled back, gasping for air. The woman stepped forward, her eyes locked on. "Lyra, Lyra," she said in a calm, almost hypnotic tone. "You know you belong with us. Come with us, and we'll make you strong again. You'll have everything you've ever wanted." Lyra's face tightened. She stepped forward, her body radiating energy. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice firm. "You think you know what's best for me, but you don't. I'll never go back to Alara." The woman's face twisted with anger. "You think you can fight us? You're nothing without us. You always were." Lyra didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, and with a fierce cry, she sent another burst of energy at the woman. The force was so strong that the woman was knocked off her feet, slamming into the wall. She didn't get up right away, but John could see that it wouldn't be long before she recovered. The other men looked at each other, seemingly unsure of what to do next. They hadn't expected Lyra to be so strong, but now they knew they couldn't just take her by force. They needed a new plan. John seized the moment. He looked over at Lyra, his mind working fast. He didn't have much time. The longer they stayed here, the more likely it was that the rest of their enemies would show up. They had to escape. Lyra, John said urgently, we need to get out of here. Do you have any way to leave the planet? Anything? Lyra hesitated. For a moment, then nodded. She turned toward the window, looking out at the city below. I don't have a ship, she said softly. But there's a place, a hidden location where we can escape. It's on the outskirts of the city, far from here. John's heart skipped a beat. Then we go there now. Ow. He turned toward the remaining men who were recovering from Lyra's blast. John grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. Let's go, before they recover. The door slammed open as the men charged at them, but John and Lyra were already moving fast. John didn't know where they were going, only that they needed to get away as quickly as possible. He didn't have any weapons and he couldn't fight them all, but they had the advantage of surprise, and they had to use it. Lyra's energy crackled in the air around them, a protective shield of sorts. As they ran, she sent blasts of energy toward the alien hunters, forcing them to stumble back. John kept his eyes on the path ahead, leading Lyra down the hallway and out the door of the building. He could hear the hunters yelling behind them, but they were too slow to catch up. For now, they were safe. They reached the street and ran through the darkened alleyways, trying to stay hidden. The city was still alive with people, but John knew they couldn't stay in the crowded areas for long. They had to reach the outskirts and find the place Lyra had mentioned. As they moved through the shadows, John's thoughts raced. How had it come to this? He had only wanted to help, and now they were both running for their lives. Lyra had trusted him, and he couldn't let her down. He would do anything to make sure she was safe. Finally, they reached a quiet part of the city, far from the bustling streets. Lyra stopped in front of a small, unmarked building that looked like it hadn't been used in years. She turned to John, her face serious. This is it, she said quietly. It's a safe place. I'll be able to contact someone who can help us. John nodded, feeling a sense of relief. They weren't safe yet, but this was a start. As they entered the building, Lyra motioned for him to follow her down a narrow staircase. At the bottom, there was a small room with a single chair and a strange device in the corner. It looked like a communication device, similar to the one Lyra had shown him earlier, but more advanced. Lyra walked toward the device and began typing on the console. The screen flickered, and after a moment, a figure appeared on the screen. It was an alien, a man with short silver hair and piercing eyes. Lyra, the man said, his voice calm but filled with concern. You've returned? I see you've brought a human with you. Lyra nodded. Yes, he's helping me. We need your help. The hunters are still after me. The man on the screen looked at John, sizing him up. You've done well to protect her, but be careful. There's more to this than you realize. They'll stop at nothing to capture her. John felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he knew one thing for certain. The hunt for Lyra wasn't over. They had only just begun their escape, and the real battle was still ahead. Lyra looked at John, her expression filled with determination. We're not running anymore, she said. We're going to stop them, once and for all. John nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it together with Lyra.